Hello, this is the first time I'm trying something like this. So this first video that you see is not going to be actually live. I'm pre-recording it because I'm still trying to figure out, I have a program that I can stream live to like multiple places at once, but I am still figuring it out. So I didn't want to keep waiting to start this, reading this book. I've been wanting to read this book. It's called The Garden Within by Dr. Anita Phillips. And I've also been thinking about just coming on here and like going through some books or different things with people, with you guys, whoever pays attention. I don't know. And so I guess I'm trying to kind of mesh these things together so that I actually do them. That would be the main thing, I think. But I have been wanting to read this book, and I don't generally make time to read books. So, I guess I could read a summary of it to see, so you could see kind of what you're getting into if you decide to stick around. It says, and I have a link somewhere on my Amazon to the book. It says, so it is a New York Times bestseller and Wall Street Journal bestseller. It says, too often we've been taught to view our emotions with suspicion, seeing them as something to be suppressed, managed, or mastered. This isn't true. Emotions are not your enemy. Internal war is not your destiny. You were created to flourish. So, Dr. Anita is a trauma therapist and mental health expert. And it says she reveals how embracing emotion is the key to living your most powerful life. Just as gardens thrive in good ground, the abundant life you've been seeking can only be grown in the soil of your heart. And this says, blending faith, the latest discoveries in neurobiology, and her own research and work as a licensed therapist, Dr. Anita shows you how to cultivate a state of emotional well-being that can strengthen your body and reverse the effects of trauma, calm anxiety, and renew your mind, and unleash a new level of spiritual power in your life. Equipping you with tools you need to nurture a part of yourself that has been misunderstood for far too long, your heart, setting you free to live just as the Creator intended. And that, I think, sounds interesting. On top of that, I've been meditating on the Garden of Eden, the story of the Garden of Eden, and the two trees in there for a number of years now, quite a few years actually. So I'm just intrigued to read this book, and I figure let's just start with chapter 1 and see what it's like. And I'll just, if I have any thoughts while we're going, I'll put them in. And ideally, this would be live, and you could inject your thoughts into it at the same time. I'm going to play this live and then try to be in the comments if I can figure that out. But we'll just start with chapter 1 for today, at least. See how long it is. The first chapter is called The Secret That Jesus Knew. And then it's Romans 8:29 from the Message. God knew what he was doing from the very beginning. The Son stands first in the line of humanity he restored. We see the original and intended shape of our lives there in him. In 2022, I traveled to 8 cities in 2 weeks. I met 30,000 people, and almost all of them were in the same kind of pain. I was part of a bus tour. For those of you who have not yet had the opportunity to have a bus tour experience, that means 12 people shelved on stacked bunks, speeding down dark highways, falling asleep in one city and waking up in another. I loved every minute. And no, I wasn't trying to avert a midlife crisis by joining a band before my body's clock struck 50. Haha. That was my haha. I was traveling and ministering with a women's empowerment movement called Women Evolve. It's led by Pastor Sarah Jakes Roberts, and that year we were on the Revolution Tour. Every night in every city, thousands of people were invited to set an intention for their own personal revolution. Pastor Sarah asked them, "What do you want to overthrow?" Every night in every city, they named a common foe. Insecurity, grief, anxiety, fear. No matter the name, the enemy was the same. Their emotions. Emotions are consistently cast as the opposition in a war that never seems to end. The scorched earth of your heart bears the scars, but your heart was never meant to be a battlefield. Your heart is a garden. I wish I had known that about my own heart sooner. I wish I had learned the strength, beauty, and importance of my emotions as a child, or as a young adult, or at least by the time I was a new mother. This is something I can definitely relate to. I have been very good at logicking away my emotions since I was a kid. So on the one hand, I can like revel in my emotions in a way, like if I'm in a good melancholy state, and I haven't really wanted to be in that state since I was probably a teenager, but I definitely had moments as a teenager and probably preteen that I would just like look in the mirror as I was crying and just really get that good emotion out, you know? Most of the time since being an adult, I have wanted to more avoid my emotions, or at least any emotions that I felt were negative. But because I had been so good at logicking them away, in the sense of like, I can always understand someone else's point of view, or understand how I could grow in the situation, or, you know, I could come up with all sorts of reasons why I didn't need to feel the way that I was feeling. And so just kind of like, oh, well, now I'm not really feeling that anymore, so I can't really get the full, like, I never really felt through my emotions that much, just because immediately there were thoughts of understanding of them, which kind of took them away, I guess, which I always kind of thought was processing them, but it's not really processing them. I think it's more stuffing them. Anyway, so like a lot of people, I grew up believing that I was meant to harness the power of my mind to live well, and that emotions were nice, but more often problematic. Yes. I spent decades ignoring that part of myself. Maybe you did too. Maybe you still are. I don't know if you relate to this at all. For some, battling emotional pain is a visceral reality. You and your feelings in hand-to-hand combat every day, up close, personal, bloody. See, I was never really super emotional. I never had like, I was never like a crier, really. I can connect with emotion fairly quickly in various situations, but I've always been kind of turned off by them, I guess you could say. Others have perfected the sniper approach. You've built a sturdy wall around your heart and now spend most of your waking hours perched on top, scanning for anyone or anything posing a threat. Disappointment, rejection, confusion, fear, or overwhelm. Excuse me, I have a gamer child out there. Yeah, I could relate to this. Oh, accidentally turned on my baby monitor, even though we don't have a baby. Child monitor in this case. Opportunities for love or joy may even be eliminated if they never seem to last anyway. This is something I have been thinking about ever since I heard the concept of foreboding joy, which is, it's kind of like you can't quite let yourself be truly joyful or truly happy, because there's just this hanging over your head of like waiting for the other shoe to drop, or yeah, it's not a good feeling. Of course, there's a third option. Let the pain in and hold it prisoner. In doing so, you acknowledge emotion's immense strength, but unable to wield greater power, you settle for a cheap substitute: control. Eventually, after those feelings have been locked away for so long, you forget they're even there. You embrace an induced amnesia for the sake of a previously unattainable peace. But that peace is precarious. An unholy earthquake will eventually shake the foundation of your life. Those prison doors will swing open, and then the battle resumes. The piercing sadness from that breakup is back. The resentment from that betrayal returns. The fear of failure runs wilder and stronger than ever. None of these approaches to managing our emotions really work, do they? So why do we keep fighting? Power. War is always about power. We don't like to acknowledge the strength of our emotions because it seems like an admission of defeat. This may be especially true if you are a person of faith, and, can I keep it real, it seems like no matter how hard you try, your faith isn't leading you to green pastures and still waters the way it looks like it's doing for other people. If any of this sounds even remotely like you or someone you love, and you're wondering if there is another way, this book is for you. This section is titled Grappling. If you ask anyone who knew me growing up whether they are surprised to hear that I wrote a book about embracing emotion, I believe they would all say, yes, absolutely shocked. I have always loved books, data, and a well-thought-out argument. I'm embarrassed to say this now, but there were plenty of times in my life that I was grateful I wasn't as emotional as some other people I knew. I liked being the calm, the cool, calm, collected one who figured things out. I decided to study human behavior precisely because I wanted to figure some things out. I imagined that one day I would write a book about trauma or mental illness. In these pages, we will talk about both, but this book is about so much more. You never know where life will take you. Let me tell you how I got here. I'm a trauma therapist. Most people end up in my line of work because of their own trauma. I am no exception. If you have seen me speak in person, you might have heard this when I was introduced. Dr. Anita was raised in a family that grappled with mental illness. Grappled. Such a tidy word, but living it was messy. I grew up in a religious family. My maternal grandfather founded 2 churches. As I pen these words, my father has been a senior pastor for nearly 50 years, and my mom has been a traveling evangelist for almost as long. My parents' beliefs were in no way confined to the church building. At home, whether washing dishes or vacuuming, mommy was almost always praying in the spirit. You could always find a bottle of anointing oil under the kitchen sink. There were basement prayer meetings, and only gospel music was allowed. We went to doctors and hospitals when we were sick, but we were also told that prayer could heal. We were taught to believe in the protection of angels. We learned about demons too, and scriptures to disrupt their work. As a child, I saw miraculous things happen. I never doubted our faith, so when a demon showed up in the doorway of the bedroom I shared with my older sister Valerie, I thought I knew what to do. I didn't see it, but she did. The first time her demon appeared, Valerie's terrified screams snatched me awake in the middle of the night. What, Val? What? Why are you screaming? Her eyes were wide open, so I knew it wasn't a nightmare. There's a demon at the door, Anita. There's a demon at the door. I glanced over there. The door was open and the hallway was dark. Val, I don't see anything. Her screams were too loud for her to hear me. I knew Val's cries would soon wake my parents and they would come to help us, but each scream cut me like a razor blade. I couldn't take it anymore. Shaking with fear, I whispered a prayer of protection and ran through that doorway to go get my dad. He was already in the hallway running in our direction. Dad didn't see the demon either, so he wrapped his arms tight around my sister and started praying. My mom was behind him, standing with me. We prayed too. Val squeezed her eyes shut, and the screams gradually subsided. Finally, she opened one eye to peek. The demon in the doorway was gone, but not for good. That awful scene happened over and over. Valerie was about 11 years old then. I was only 6. Her screams became my midnight alarm clock. I started getting anxious. It became hard for me to fall asleep. A few years later, when our room became my room, at bedtime, the first thing I did was close that door. Although I never saw it myself, Valerie's demon had become my demon too. I would be 28 years old before I could fall asleep in a room with the door open. As an adult, my sister was diagnosed with schizophrenia, a mental illness that sometimes includes seeing and hearing things that aren't there. Today, those who have this illness can live well with ongoing treatment, but Valerie was born in 1969. Back then, it wasn't about my religious parents refusing to believe in mental illness. There was simply no real mental health conversation in our community in 1969, or 1979, or 1989 for that matter. I host a faith and mental health podcast called In the Light. My mother was my first guest. During that talk with her, I learned that Valerie's earliest symptoms emerged when she was around 5 years old. Looking back, we can see it, but at the time our family had no idea what was happening. My sister was tormented by the sight of that demon for close to a year, and then it stopped. We didn't know it then, but Valerie had been exposed to illegal drugs and realized they kept the hallucinations away. Wow. 12? Freedom from that torment was too much for any child to resist. By her late teens, Val was addicted. Drug use led her to spending much of her life in the streets, but when she was about 40 years old, she went to the last of many addiction recovery programs and was finally able to stop using. She strengthened her relationship with Jesus. She got treatment for her mental illness. She got a good husband. She got a whole lot of joy. And then she got to see God face to face. Her body bore the destruction of the years her addiction stole. She was almost 50 when her heart stopped beating. My sister didn't die by suicide, but I still consider untreated mental illness her cause of death. Valerie did once receive professional mental health care as a young person. A crisis during her sophomore year in high school led to 4 months at a psychiatric hospital. It did not go well. The professionals assigned to her and the culture of the institution felt incredibly foreign and at times condescending to my family, both as people of faith and as African Americans. The staff there either didn't know how or didn't care to bridge the divide between their world and ours. So I became one of them. I became a mental health professional, but there were questions my training alone could not answer. This section is called I Still Want to See It in My Bible. Once I heard my mom say, I know something is wrong and that Valerie needs more help than we can give her, but I still want to see it in my Bible. How can I understand it in my Bible? I was just a teenager then, but I made a silent promise to find the answer to her question. Conversations at the intersection of faith and mental health have been contentious for a long time, and in many ways they still are, but I see progress. The overwhelming impact of what began in 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic, vicious debates about closed churches, masks, and politics, heightened experience of racial trauma and injustice, seemed to inspire a truce between faith communities and the mental health community, albeit an uneasy one. The emotional suffering wrought by the pandemic wasn't choosy. People of all faiths or no faith found themselves newly in the grip of depression, anxiety, panic attacks, and addiction relapses. More churches than ever began discussing mental health from their platforms, in their staff meetings, and online with their parishioners. It was encouraging. But I call the truce uneasy because it was born of necessity rather than resolution. A lot of questions that bolstered and sustained that divide persist, and for many practicing Christians, my mother's question remains, how can I understand it in my Bible? My mother's question was so powerful because it wasn't an either-or question, it was an everything question. It was a big picture question. My parents taught me to look for God everywhere and in all things. They encouraged my work and my research to help prevent the type of pain our family endured, with only one caveat. Never choose an answer that limits God. I like that. Over the years, I carried my mother's question with me. The shape of the question changed, but the essence remained the same. It began as, how do we understand mental illness through the Bible? But evolved into, how do we understand wellness? Is well-being simply the absence of pain? If it's more, then where should all these healing journeys lead, and how will we know when we get there? What was the Creator's original intent when humanity was formed? How does Scripture define well-being? I waited a long time for that answer, only to find out it has everything to do with our hearts. I can't wait to show you how Scripture clarifies again and again that it is the heart, not the mind, that God designed to be at the very center of the human experience, and that includes our feelings. I believe this book will change the way you think about how you feel. But just in case you are reluctant to join me on this journey because you believe that emotional is mutually exclusive with powerful, let's wrap this introduction by turning our attention to Jesus. Jesus, his emotions, and his powerful life. Jesus stood in front of Lazarus' tomb and wept. John 11:35. When he showed up in Jerusalem and found the temple set up to change money instead of lives, Jesus unleashed a whip and table flips. Matthew 21:12. Later, in a garden, wrestling with the most intense feelings of anguish we can imagine, our soon-to-be Savior turned his face toward heaven and begged to be rescued from a brutal end. Luke 22:42. Then, on the cross, about to offer his last full measure of devotion, Jesus hit the hardest wall of all. He couldn't feel his Father's presence. Jesus expressed those feelings of abandonment, distress, and despair through the words of Psalm 22:1. He asked a question that pain would one day plant in my heart and in yours. Jesus asked his Father, why? Mark 15:34. Jesus literally knows what our hearts feel in our weakest moments because he felt it too. How do I know? Because the Bible tells me so. For we have not a high priest which cannot be touched with the feeling of our infirmities, but was in all points tempted like as we are, yet without sin. Hebrews 4:15. This verse tells us that Jesus experienced every form of physical and emotional pain that we do. Not only that, but Jesus also expressed those feelings with his words and through his body, which means feeling isn't failing because Jesus never failed. Have you ever deeply grieved the loss of a loved one and then felt guilty for not feeling better sooner since you know that you will see them again in heaven? Have you ever been rightfully furious but held it in because you believed it would be wrong to express your anger? Have you ever felt like a faith failure because fear tied your stomach into knots? Have you ever desperately wanted an explanation from God but thought you might be struck by lightning for crying out, why? If having and expressing those feelings wasn't a sin for Jesus, then it's not a sin for you. No emotion is a sin. Let that sink in. Now ask yourself whether you have ever berated yourself for feeling something that Jesus felt too. We spend so much time and energy fighting a part of us that brings us closer to being like him. That revelation alone is worth the price of admission, but there's more. After Jesus wept at Lazarus' tomb, he raised Lazarus from the dead. After Jesus demanded order at the temple, he performed healing miracles. After Jesus endured Gethsemane's agony, hundreds of soldiers were knocked to the ground by the power of his words alone. After Jesus absorbed the sear of separation at Calvary, His decision to die shook the ground, tore a 30-foot temple veil in half from top to bottom, and set the stage for victory over death itself. In each of these instances, we see Jesus' pained heart give way to a supernatural display. Jesus knew the secret of the connection between our hearts and a powerful life. It's time for you to know it too. So I'm going to say to you what I said to those 30,000 hearts that gathered for the Revolution Tour in 2022. You don't need to overthrow your emotions to experience a revolution in your life. You just need to overthrow the lies you have believed about your emotions. The Creator designed your heart to be a garden, not a war zone. A truly powerful life isn't won, it's cultivated. This book will take you on that journey. In part 1, you will discover how nurturing your emotional well-being positions you to unleash spiritual power. In part 2, you will discover how your emotional life waters the garden of your mind. In part 3, you will discover how emotional health nourishes your physical health and strengthens your embodied garden. Are you ready to end the war with your emotions and embrace the powerful life you were created for? If so, the first step is easy. Turn the page. So that's the end of the first chapter, or the introduction. I don't know for sure, as I'm reading a Kindle version of this, but that's what we're going to be done with for today. And I welcome any thoughts, comments, etc. And I'm not sure yet when exactly if I'm gonna try to do this regularly at regular intervals or what, but you can probably watch my stories, and I'll try to maybe give some advance notice that I'm gonna go live, but you can also always just catch the replay. So all right, thank you. Talk to you again soon.